feel free to ask questions, of course. I'm gonna make a new composition. We will do 1080 by 1350. So this is 4:5 ratio. Again, something you can post on Instagram if you wanted to. I'm going to do 24 frames per second. And again, we'll just start with 1 second. I do usually put 0, 1 at the end of these because I kind of like to have it 1 extra frame just so I can align things perfectly to that 1 second spot. I'll try to work at like quarter or a third just so it works a little bit faster. And I'm going to try and save these in a particular place so that they all go to the same location. So I'll just call this my 1 second video. And we'll work off of a black background so it's transparent in case we want to layer it up on something else. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with just a new shape. And maybe we'll do some kind of a spinning or rotation movement. So I think there's an opportunity for us to be able to kind of jump in here with a shape. And I might choose that kind of soft gray color that Emily G was using, I think is a really nice one. And just create a sphere. I'm going to go ahead and use my anchor tool point to make sure that I can put this anchor point in right in the center. For some reason, when you make a shape, it looks like it selects the ellipse layer. When you select the ellipse layer, it does not let you move the actual anchor point on the object. So I usually have to click out of that and then click back on the shape to even find the anchor point to move it around. Frustrating, but what can you do? I think if you move it into the corners in the center too, while you're holding on the command button, it'll snap to the center of that object. And let me change the color here. Under fill, choose a different one. A softer gray, I think looks really nice on the black background. And also something that can be easily colored differently later on with any kind of layer styles, color overlay, gradient overlay, whatever you want to do in the future. So there's an opportunity for that. So if you want to make something similar, you're certainly welcome to. We'll try to make one of these each together. Pattern is one that we looked at last time, and I think a broken pattern is going to give you a little bit more of a secondary characteristic with this, rather than something that's so encompassing within the composition. Make this a tiny bit smaller. See if that changed scale. Nope, cool. All right, and certainly interrupt me if you guys have any questions. I'm going to try and maybe make something that expands or rotates in some way. So simple motion. So I may go ahead and expand this over scale so that it kind of goes up and then falls down. We'll start at 100. I'll go up to maybe 120, 150, somewhere in there. And then go down to 100 again, so it loops. So just sort of like this expansion, contraction kind of motion. And I might easy ease these. So function F9. I have these selected. Just missed one. And then I can select all of these and go into the graph editor, because you can do some really fun stuff with this. Now, right now it's set to speed graph. I could do value graph, but speed graph I think will do what we want. And I'm just going to select these points so that I can sort of give them a little bit more character. So maybe just ease out a little bit at the beginning into this kind of a little bit sharper transition. And then ease in at the end. See if I can get these to line up very nicely. Just a little S curve there in the center. And when I'm working with the speed graph, guys, a lot of the times I'm making something that I think visually looks good on the graph itself. And a lot of times that's going to get you a motion that works really well together. So if you can see here, it kind of like mirrors itself a little bit on one side or the other. I find that that is kind of a good way to think about these speed graphs. And what we're doing is just creating change in the motion. So when I play this, it kind of has this, I don't know, heartbeat feeling to it because of the way that it expands and contracts. I may shrink this up a little bit. I could pre-compose this actually and make complements of these. I may do that. Sort of a heartbeat circle, I guess. I do want to go into my composition here, and I'm going to choose that region of interest. Let's find the biggest size where it is, the largest scale, which is right about here, 12 frames in. Make sure I'm not cutting off any of the edges. And then I believe it is composition and crop comp to region of interest. And when I come out of this comp, it will be a much smaller version so that I can compose these a little bit easier. So I'll make a few copies of this. To move them all over. Set up a little bit of a grid pattern. I kind of want to shrink these though. Can maybe make them perfectly aligned. I got my alignment tab. Center those. Center these. These center horizontally. Might make these ones smaller. Again, what I'm doing is just making these smaller. They'll still have the same animation, so they still grow the same amount. They're just are smaller in the pre-composed section. So as far as a secondary animation, that may be enough. I might adjust these in their spacing a little bit. There we go. This one could be lower. Again, the point of these is to have as many of them to choose from. So they don't need to be very complicated. You can always add more things to them later. Move this down slightly. Seems off-centered. Cool. I might export that one. Save this somewhere. New folder on the desktop. 1 second.
Josh, for that,
Yes.
The one that you're exporting, is that gonna have like a, because you're just exporting the little baby element or the I was just like, okay, so if you imported that exported file into like the other document there, like this is the, I want to use the element in this document. Is it going to be able to lay transparently over?
Yes. So the background will be transparent, and you can double check that by hitting this little button here. So like the only things that'll be in the animation footage that you layer things up with is just the circles.
Okay.
So this sort of transparency grid, that's a great question. This transparency grid sort of shows you where that transparency will be when you put that footage in. Because there is no background, and even though it renders it on a black background when you watch the video, that black is just kind of the default of the player. So it seems like it has that black background. There's no background in this. So yeah, it can certainly be used that way. Good question. I could also maybe go into one of these if I just wanted one circle to sort of use and kind of render this as well. So I may go ahead and do that. And I can just sort of name them differently within the space of where I wanted to save these. And then I can go ahead and play them. Probably won't take long to render. And if I double check, I should have Way too many folders open. So let's make them a little bit more fun and a little bit more complicated. But I do think it's fun to kind of create these as you go. You can add more complexity to them. I'm going to pause my recording there just for a moment, just talk about this piece as we put them together. So this is what I ended up with, just sort of changed it, made it a little bit more different, added a little bit of variety to it. So instead of stacking multiple pieces together in a little bit more of a pattern, I still used this particular shape, added in a stroke instead of a fill. So it's got a sort of a stroke color that's been changed to turned off the fill. The fill's still there, so you can sort of see that, but it sort of changes the way that trim paths work, although that looks pretty cool. You might render that one as well. But the trim paths is a feature that I added on. Again, contents, click the add button to be able to trim paths. I can delete this layer. Essentially, you can go to add and then choose trim paths. There are 3 features that you want to trim paths with: the start, the end, and the offset. I just click them all on. And then if you select your layer and then hit the U key, you'll just see all of the things that you have set up as keyframes. So if I then go in and sort of say, okay, I want this to go from 100 to like 5, so it becomes very small. And so you can sort of see that that motion is going to kind of expand or close this circle. I can then kind of go back to the original beginning that I started with by copy pasting that same frame. So it's going to go forwards and then backwards, but I don't want it to do that. I want it to rotate, continue going around. So I actually need to go from the other side. So right now it starts at 100 and goes down to 5 from the end position. So from here, I'll start at 0 with the start position, and we'll go up to 95, which will kind of continue the rotation around. Maybe we'll add a rotate to this, so that it rotates once all the way through. It's kind of a cool motion. Not exactly what I intended, but that looks kind of neat. And let's go back to the group and see what that looks like. A little bit more of like a, I don't know, a wipe and spin fill. I don't know. It's kind of neat. So a lot of things you can do with this to sort of change their motion. Again, you're just trying to make secondary motions. These are also things that could make a little bit more sense, maybe if you have a concept for your particular project of what you want to share, so that you can have something to rely on for content, rather than just a random list of actions. But I think this is a pretty fun process, seeing how creative you can be with making multiple pieces of things. Let's go ahead and start a new one. So I'll save this one as spheres 2. Let's start one that's a little bit more of a rotoscoped option. So I'm going to close this project. I'll go to composition new, and we'll set up the same. We'll try 3 seconds for this one. Let's try 1 second. And then if I need to expand it, we can. Same comp, same size, same scale. And I will go ahead and add in some shapes. So let's start with our pen tool. So we can sort of change this shape. And I'm guessing there's something that we can do that's kind of fun with this. So I'm going to just draw a pen shape here. I think trim paths and path animation may be able to stack. We'll see. Swooping form. And I'm going to open up the contents here. We'll turn off our fill and set it to stroke. Looks like we can animate the path, and I think we can also animate trim paths. So let's try both of those and see if they work together. Now let's get a little bit thinner stroke. 4 was pretty good before. Change the color to something a little bit softer. Softer. That's nice. Just animate trim paths first. It's going from one to the other. Actually would like it to start the other direction. So instead of starting with the end, let's start with the beginning. Go to 95. So it draws itself there. Although another way, if I just want it to be a little bead, let's make this a 3. You don't have to animate these ones, we'll just do the offset to sort of get it to draw itself from one way around. Maybe it's a little bit smaller. It goes down, maybe a little bit bigger. Kind of fun. Doesn't loop though. Can move these back and get it to loop. Should go back. Just about. Seems a little fast. Let's go to composition and composition settings. We'll turn this time up. Holding down the option key, be able to drag those frames out. Much smoother. And let's see if we can change the path as well as it goes. So I'm going to key these at the beginning and end so it consistently goes back and forth. And maybe in the center. Just add an extra loop in there. See if I move this around too, if that changes where it hits. It comes through. Oh, that's rather fun. It looks rather rotoscoped, I think. Maybe if I add a little bit more path animation to add some variety to this. And this random moving line. some fun loops out of it. And let's easy ease everything. See how that looks. Let me save it for meandering line. It's rather fun. Okay. Something rotoscoped. I'll export that one. All right, and I'm going to stop recording there for a minute. So starting another one, let's go ahead and add a type layer. So we go down to new and type, we can add a type layer. Let's type something. So let's have some space maybe. I like space, you guys. And we'll just make this sort of a secondary motion. So I'm going to put it in the center here. Of course, you can use your character window to be able to set up the type and how you'd like it to be. If I want to increase the size before I start animating anything, I can certainly do that here. I may make it fairly small. I think white type works, but maybe let's go back to this kind of standardized gray that we've been using for a lot of things. And you can also mess around with the line spacing, but we're going to play with tracking on this anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at 0. So it's just consistent to start with. And as I go through this, I maybe want to do something that's about 1 second and then goes back and sort of resets itself back to 0. So a couple different things that we can change within the type tool. And if you guys recall some of these options, I think the animate feature is one we'll jump into now. But of course, you can also animate your source text. So if we wanted it to change what it says within the words, if we click the source text feature and go over maybe 12 frames, click another keyframe, and then go ahead and just change what it says by typing, double clicking in there with my type tool or double clicking on the name, we'll also be able to change the lettering that's in there. And let's go ahead and call this one, let's change it to spacious. So it goes from space to spacious. Now you should see that these are hold keyframes. You can tell they're hold keyframes because they're square rather than diamond shape. All that means is that there's no transition of space here. It just snaps to the next one. But we can add some motion in here to make it look like that snap is not as like drastic of a change. And I maybe will change this back to, or let's go, yeah, there. And then we'll add another keyframe here, and then we'll change it back to space over here. So I can actually copy paste this keyframe. So it goes space, spacious, and then space again. And let's add in our type animator here. So if under animate and type next to the little type tool there, I'm going to add in tracking. There's 2 things that you can animate on this, the tracking amount before and after. But really the tracking amount's the main thing here. So I'm going to turn that up. I'm going to go in about 1 second and we'll just make this really wide. I want to cut it off too much right to the edge of our screen maybe. And then I'm going to add some ease on this so that it's a little bit more of a fast motion. I want to center this in my space as well. Here we go. So we're changing words during the motion, but to make it not as obvious between those 2 spaces, and I'm going to go ahead and put another keyframe at the end to return back to my initial spot. And let's select these and we'll do easy. Function F9. And then I'll open up my speed graph here. And if I recall on my timing here, when it switches to spacious is right about the 12th frame mark. And if I put my crosshair there, I can kind of show on my speed graph where that transition is going to be. So if I want the most amount of change around that area, it's going to kind of hide that there's really much of a change there. It's just going to kind of snap between those 2 spaces. And if I recall where my next transition is a minute and 12 frames, which again, is just halfway between 1 second and 2 seconds. And I will just add in again the majority of my change in that space. So using these little handlebars to be able to pull that so that it happens very quickly at that time. Starts to ramp up and happen at that time. All right, let's preview that. Not too bad. It's a little bit obvious, but not too bad. All right, let me pause there, see how you guys are doing.